Challenge: configuring IP with PowerShell. Are you tired of clicking around the GUI? Use PowerShell. Use the command line. In this lab, we'll configure a static IP version 4 address within PowerShell. To do this, we'll use the following format. And we're going to use the netsh command. This command could do all kinds of things in Windows. We're just going to use it here to configure TCP/IP. And for this command, we're going to use netsh and a lot of options and parameters. It's going to be netsh interface IP set address, and then your connection name. By default in Windows, if you have a wired connection, that connection's name will be called Ethernet. And that's what I'll be using in the demonstration in just a minute. Then we'll say static because we're going to manually configure the IP address. And then we'll enter the actual IP version 4 address that we want to use, as well as the IP version 4 subnet mask and the gateway address. Afterward, we'll add a DNS server so that we can do our name to IP resolution. And once again, we'll use the netsh interface IP command, but this time we'll type add DNS, once again, our connection name, and then the IP address of our DNS server. After we do that, we'll test it and make sure that it can function and that we can connect to the internet. When we're done, we'll set it back to DHCP. And the command for that, netsh interface IP set address, the connection name, and just DHCP. So let's get into the demonstration now. I'm going to be doing this on a Windows 11 virtual machine, and we want to open up PowerShell as an administrator. Several ways to do this. In Windows 11, you could right-click on Start and open Windows Terminal, which will automatically open PowerShell, and you'd want to do that as an admin. Or we could press the Windows key and type in PowerShell and run it from there. Or do it from the run prompt and type PowerShell. And to run it as an admin, we'd press Control-Shift-Enter. But I like the search option. It's very easy. We can right-click on Windows PowerShell and select Run as Administrator. And we'll say yes. And that brings up the Windows PowerShell as an administrator, meaning in elevated mode. So now we can do these types of commands that we need to do as an admin. I'm going to change to the root directory and clear the screen with a Control-L so that we have a little bit more space here. And the first thing I want to do is run an ipconfig/all to check out the current IP configuration. Now, as I mentioned, this is a virtual machine, and it's on a virtualization platform that automatically hands out IP addresses. I know that this virtual machine is obtaining its IP address from a DHCP server. I know that because here it says DHCP enabled and yes. So we know we're getting our TCP/IP information from a DHCP server, and that's the DHCP server that's built into my virtualization platform. The IP version 4 address that we received is 192.168.122.63. So the IP network that my virtualization platform is using here is 192.168.122. I want to stay on that particular network. What differentiates this system from other systems is the last octet, that .63. And I'll be changing that when we set a static IP address. We're also getting the subnet mask information from the DHCP server, which is 255.255.255.0. We also see the default gateway, which is 192.168.122.1, and the DNS server, which is the same host. Now, you might do this on a network with a Soho router, and it would work in the same manner. Your network might be 192.168.0 or 192.168.1. Or if you're on a different virtualization platform, it might be a different network as well. So whatever that network is, that's the network that you want to work within. So I'm going to change this now. I don't want to have DHCP anymore. A lot of times I'll be working on a system and I want it to have a static IP address so that I know the IP address will not change and I can have permanent connections to that system via that static IP. So a lot of times I'll use a static IP address. So let's make the change now. We're going to do that with the netsh command, and that's going to be interface and IP set address. And then we need the name of our wired network interface card. Now, again, this is a virtual machine, so it uses virtualized hardware, but it works the same way as a physical system. And what we want to look for is Ethernet adapter, and then the name that's after that. By default, in Windows, the name of a wired connection is called Ethernet. If you're working with a wireless connection, the default name is Wi-Fi. You could change this in the PowerShell if you wanted to, but we're going to stick with the name Ethernet. And we want to put that in double quotes. So we'll add that in now. You can see the different color there. And then we want to state that we are going to add a static IP address. So we put in the word static, and then the IP address I want to use. Well, I'm going to use the same network, but I'm going to change the last octet. And I'm just going to change it to, say, .150. It doesn't really matter as long as the address that I select is not being used by any other systems. So I'm going to type 192.168.122.150. Next, we need the subnet mask. And I'm going to use the same subnet mask that I'm currently using, 255.255.255.0. And that just wrapped around the screen there. Now, you could also do something like this, /24, which is CIDR notation. It's the same thing. For now, I'll just do 255.255.255.0. And then we need to know the gateway address. It's going to be the same default gateway. So we'll type in this IP. For you, it may be different on your system. It probably will be. But that's the IP for me, 192.168.122.1. And that's it. That's our command. So we'll press enter. That will apply the new information, deactivate and reactivate the network interface. And then we can check that with an ipconfig/all. Okay. Now, when we look at DHCP enabled, it says no. We're not using DHCP anymore. It's a static IP. When we look at the IP version 4 address, we see 192.168.122.150. And we have our default gateway. Now, the DNS server is already there, but if you had a problem with that, if there was an issue with DNS, you could add that on, and you would do that with the netsh interface IP add DNS for our Ethernet connection, and then specify the IP address 192.168.122.1. And it says the object is already in the list. But just in the case that it wasn't there, if you lost it for some reason, or it didn't show up when you changed over to static, then you could add that with this command. Now we want to go ahead and test it and make sure it works. So I'm going to ping a website on the internet, and we get replies. We can ping dpro computer, so we know the test has passed, and we should be able to do anything we need to do with our internet connection, inbound and outbound. That's it. That's how you change to a static IP. Now let's go ahead and change it back to DHCP, and we'll do that with the netsh interface IP set address, and the name is Ethernet, and just say DHCP. That's going to make the change, deactivate and reactivate the network interface. And then I'll just up arrow to ipconfig/all to check it. Once again, DHCP enabled, yes. IP version 4 address, .63. Well, Windows remembers the IP address that we were using, and it reapplies that, as long as the DHCP server is okay with that. Our gateway address is there, and our DNS server is there. We'll test once again with a ping, all as well. Okay, so the only things you might change with that are your network number. You want to put in whatever network number you're using. For example, if you're on VirtualBox, you're probably on 10.0.2. If you're on VMware Workstation, you might be using another 192.168 network. If you're working on the local area network on a test computer like a laptop, and you have a Soho network, it might be 192.168.0 or .1 or what have you. And the name of the adapter, if it's wired, by default will be Ethernet. By default, if it's wireless, it'll be Wi-Fi. And make sure you put that in double quotes. Now you'll notice that we have the blue background here. If we were to run the command $PS version table, you'll see that the PowerShell version that I'm running is 5.1. This is an older version. We have much newer versions of PowerShell. And so in another challenge video, we'll show how to update PowerShell to a newer version. Now, one other thing here, sometimes you'll be working on a system that has lots of network connections. For example, here's a Windows laptop. I'm going to open up PowerShell on here as an administrator. Say yes to that. Bring that up. And if I run an ipconfig on here with the /all, you're going to see tons and tons and tons of information. And the Bluetooth and the wireless aren't even connected right now. So it's limited, but there's still tons of information. There's all kinds of virtual networks and wired connection and blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of information to look at within ipconfig/all. So if you're working on a server with lots of network connections, or if you're working on a power workstation with lots of connections, or maybe a developer laptop with lots of virtual connections, sometimes you may want to filter this information. So you might do an ipconfig/all with the pipe sign and do select string, run the SLS parameter here, and then filter for what you want. So for example, I might filter for description and also IP version 4. When I do that, I get a lot less information and just what I want. So for example, description, Realtek PCI Express controller, that's the wired connection, and its IP version 4 address is 10.42.0.250. And you can do that for each of these here, all of the connections. So just a quick little trick there, use SLS to filter out results of commands that give you tons of information. Just a little bonus there. All right. And like I said, in a future video, we'll show how to upgrade to the latest stable version of PowerShell. And in closing, go ahead now. I challenge you to try configuring a new IP address on a test Windows system now. I recommend a virtual machine, but some test system, always do all this stuff on testing systems, not your main system. And remember to run PowerShell as an admin. Chances are you will need PowerShell in the field. Use it.